presentation on the papacy in light of the information I presented to him. So I can't believe he would sit here in front of you and say, for 2,000 years the church has believed this about Matthew 16. That is untrue. Let me quote Dr. Jackson. In truth, the supremacy of the Roman See, as it has been understood in later times, was hardly at the time of Basil on the horizon. No bishop of Rome had even been present at Nicaea or at Sardica, where a certain right of appeal to his see was conceded. A bishop of Rome signed the Sirmian blasphemy. No bishop of Rome was present to save the world from the lapse of Ariminum. The great intellectual Arian war was fought out without any claim of Rome to speak. Half a century after Basil's death, great Orientals were quite unconscious of this supremacy.
I've read
now,
that.
Mr. Staples sits there and says, Mr. White misrepresented the sixth canon of the Council of Nicaea. Prove it. Get it out right now. It's sitting on your desk. He says he misrepresents 28th canon of the Council of Chalcedon. Sitting right there on your desk. Prove it. I didn't. I don't in here. I ask for documentation. If you're going to make accusations, sir, back them up. Back them up.
Okay, well then I must. All right. First of all, the canon.
Wait a minute.
What's that?
First of all, the question was asked to him, so it's next time for another person.
Oh, wonderful. Yeah.
The fairness here is wonderful. What, he should get double responses. I like that.
You have the priest to defend you, though, so.
It seems to me that there's a logical contradiction in your position on the canon, and I'm wondering how is it that you can know with absolute certainty that the letter of Philemon, the contents of it, for example, are infallible, and yet you don't know that the letter of Philemon as a whole is part of an infallible canon?
It's very interesting. I have the exact same level of certainty about Philemon that you have about the church. Mr. Staples just presented an argument for why he believes the church is infallible that was based upon what? Well, you look at this, and you look at the history, and you look at that, and if that's enough to prove that the church is infallible, why can't I have the exact same, and I hope you're able to hear this as you're leaving, but why can't I have the exact same type of level of certainty on the same basis? It's an inconsistent response. The canon is given by God. The canon is determined by God's act of inspiration. That makes it a revealed truth, but it's a part of Scripture. Now, I answer the same question. How can I have infallible knowledge of every bit of content of the Bible? I don't have infallible knowledge of every bit of the content of the Bible. Sufficient knowledge, just like the Jews that Jesus said, you are accountable for the Scriptures. Mr. Staples says they didn't have any infallible authority, but they were held accountable. Why can't I? I don't understand why people will not deal with this issue other than saying, well, just like my friends in Salt Lake City do. They say, you can't even know what's in the Bible because you don't have the prophet to tell you. And I say, yes, I can. Oh, no, you can't. You need to have someone to tell you. You need the golden index. Now, they don't say that, but I call this the golden index syndrome. And Mr. Staples says, well, Mr. White can't give us one verse that gives us this canon in Scripture, and that denies sola scriptura, as if the canon was some extra biblical revelation. I'm really hoping that Mr. Staples will deal with what I said about the canon in here. I sent him the book. It would be nice if he'd respond to actually my position instead of a characterization of my position. That would be helpful to all of us here. Answer how the man before Christ, he says the man knew by keeping tradition. Infallibly? I'd like him to answer, did a man know infallibly, as you asked me? He's got 2 minutes, probably more to do that right now.
I already answered that question, and once again, and what I encourage you to do is get the tape, wind it back, and listen to what I said. I already answered it. But now, as far as your question about Philemon, I am not saying the Catholic Church does not say that we create the canon. The Catholic Church recognizes the canon authoritatively. Okay, there is a huge difference. We do not say that Hippo in 393 created the canon. The Scripture is inspired, if you say materially, in the order of being, so to speak, but in the order of knowing. You cannot know that in the way, what Mr. White is saying in essence is, well, you just read the Bible and it'll confirm itself in your heart. And lots of people agreed about it in the early church. He gives you his opinion of what the fathers say, his opinion of, even though I can show you canons from the early church that disagree with the canon that we accept today in the church. Well, we just know today. How do you know? Well, if you read the Bible, and Mr. White has said it, when God speaks His word, He doesn't need to show you His business card. In other words, that is no different than the Mormon who said, when you ask him, why do you believe these things? Oh, I've got a burning in my bosom. Folks, that might be lunch. We need, and finally, folks, the reason why we need more than just an authority, even that the saints in the Old Testament had, is because the New Testament is a better covenant established on better promises, and we have a greater authority, so much so that Jesus could say to the church, if they hear you, they hear me. Jesus does not present us with a gospel that Mr. White does. I don't have infallible authority. Oh, I don't have infallible authority. We just get in the Scriptures and we dig and we pray to God and we ask God and we do the best we can, but I don't have any infallible authority. That's not the authority that Jesus Christ established in the New Testament, folks. He said, if they hear you, they hear me. And Jesus didn't open the floor for discussion when He said, thus saith God. Neither does His church.
One last question for Mr. Staples, since we began with Mr. White. And then we'll have our 10-minute concluding statement. So sorry we're not able to get to all the questions, but I'm sure that our
Don't
speakers,
leave before the concluding.
Our speakers will be very happy to see you afterwards, at least for some time. But there are 10-minute concluding statements from each of our speakers. Yes.
Mr. Staples, you've made much of the fact tonight that the reason Protestants are divided is because they don't have a person or a group of persons that they can turn to say, thus saith the Lord. My question is, where were these people hiding who were able to infallibly end all of these arguments in 1054 where the East split from the West?
Well, in fact, if you'd pick up, and let me recommend a work to you by Dr. Warren Carroll. It's an excellent work. I believe he's going to go down as one of the great historians of our century. He's a professor, founder of Christendom College. It's called the Founding of Christendom. And if you are even remotely versed in the history of the church, you see that in fact exactly that happened. That is, the church did in fact deal with every single heresy there was. In fact, Athanasius, whom my opponent is so fond of quoting, says that the Council of Nicaea, if I can find